excited to introduce our final keynote of the day. Michael Dimock is the president of Roots of Change, and Michael is literally one of those people who's been improving the food system his whole life. He was instrumental in the creation of the slow food movement, and their commitment to ensuring that everyone has access to good, clean, and fair food. He is also extremely committed to the preservation of food cultures and indigenous foods. And he, as president of Roots of Change, really embodies that I think everything that I think the food movement really needs. That's positivity, it's thought leadership, and it's the ability to inspire and educate others. Michael and Roots of Change are really working from the ground up to provide a roadmap of what the food system can look like if we truly honor and value the land, farmers, workers, biodiversity, water, soil, and everything else that goes into creating food. I'm so honored that Michael could be here today to share with us some thoughts of inspiration and a way forward. Please join me in welcoming Michael to the stage.
Wow, you're still here. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been inspired by the inspiring people and the thoughtful comments and dialogue that's gone on. I was exhilarated by the interruption because it's a real reflection of reality. And I have the unenviable task of speaking to you before you get a chance to go and enjoy the libations and the food. So I'm going to try and make it quick. But I do have some things that I wanted to say. But I will tell you this. I spent probably 10 or 12 hours working on my comments, and everything I wanted to say has already been said. In fact, it's been said many times in different ways. And that's actually the beauty of what's going on in the food movement. And that's really what I want to talk about, I guess. So I'm going to leave my comments behind. If you really want to see what I was going to say, you can go to the Roots of Change website in the days ahead, and we'll post it as a blog. But I'm going to riff. I'm going to go off the cuff. I'm going to talk about what came to me, what I've heard. But I'm going to begin with a guided meditation. So I want you all to kind of allow me to take you on a trip to the beginning of the food movement. And I'm going to take you through the arc of history, which is bending in a certain direction to achieve something great. And I want you to think about how much of it you remember, experienced, saw, are familiar with. And then I'm going to end up by just talking a little bit in more detail about what's been happening in California and where we're gaining ground and really strengthening the food movement to take on the next big piece of what we have to do, which you've heard a lot today, which is to change the policies that frame the future of the development of the food system. So, with that, please close your eyes. I'm going to start in the 1960s. So, the food movement, I mean, it really goes way back to the UK and the 30s and the 40s, but I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start in the 1960s with organic farmers and the UC Santa Cruz organic gardening program. And about that same time in the 1960s was Cesar Chavez and the UFW. And that was really, in a way, the beginning of what we are the end of, or what we've reached today. But then we had the 1970s. 1970s, what happened? Wendell Berry. How many people remember Wendell Berry? And his writing about the conflicts between the industrial and the agrarian economies. Kind of to prove what he was talking about, by the early 1980s, what happened? The farm crash in the Midwest. That was a huge moment where his hypotheses were proved, and there was a response from the public. Farm Aid was born. Community Alliance with Family Farmers was born out here in California. There were groups that were deciding they wanted to side with family farmers. So as the Midwest was crashing, something very interesting was happening in Europe. In Italy, Carlo Petrini and the slow food movement kind of poured out of the hills of Piemonte and Tuscany and started talking about this idea of food culture and the impact of fast food on biodiversity and cultural diversity and our ability to taste. So as that was happening in Europe, the farm-to-table movement was really taking off. Alice Waters and other great chefs who in the late 70s started these farm-to-table restaurants started to gain steam into the 80s. At the same time, we had the beginnings of the farmers market movement, right? Today, there are 8,000 farmers markets in the United States, and that really has its roots back then. 1990, what happened? National Organic Production Act was passed. With that came the seal that we all know. With that was the real launch pad for the natural products industry, which had its roots earlier, but it really started to take off because they had a vehicle for proving their differentiation in the marketplace. At around that same time, the food justice and the urban ag movement was born. And you had groups like the Food Project in Boston, or Live Power in Milwaukee, or City Slicker and People's Grocery in Oakland. These groups started to come forth and wake urban centers up to the fact that we could produce lots of food, and it's good food. And so really by the early 2000s, you could say that a food movement was being born. You could see it. There were hints. And so what happened? Well, the correspondents, Eric Schlosser, Michael Pollan, academics, Marion Nestle started to write books. And TV, the news media started to pick up the stories, the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine. All this stuff started to bubble up, and a super rich environment was created really by 2002, I would say, where the food movement was starting to take shape. You could see it. And about the same time, because we had this story going on, entrepreneurs got into the game. Lots of exciting things began to happen in the early 2000s, with entrepreneurs taking the memes, the values of the food movement, and started to apply them to companies. And you heard many stories of it today. But it was also in the 2000s that three big pieces occurred that have put us over the top in the sense of, I think, making the food movement unstoppable. It is unstoppable, and is going to achieve its goals, because what happened? Well, first of all, the obesity epidemic. It had the researchers saw it coming in the 90s, but it really hit the front pages and was talked about, and public health took it on as an issue in the 2000s. Then something else really big and important happened, which was the climate change, right? Inconvenient Truth came out. And people started talking about the fact that the food system had all this embedded carbon-based, fossil fuel-based energy in it, and that the soils were a place where carbon had been lost. So that was a really big piece that happened in the 2000s. And then finally, I think the crash. The crash in 2008-9 gave fuel to this nascent, this emerging local economies thing that was going on. So the local economies movement started to take hold, and people started to put together the fact that we could solve multiple problems by building localized food systems that were based on healthy food and local food companies. So we are here today with this huge multi-layered system, or ecosystem, as Navina said today, and she's right. It's an ecosystem. And what's the first thing we know about an ecosystem? You need a diverse set of living organisms that are working in a symbiotic way to keep the health and resilience and the evolution of that system going. Well, we have to recognize that about what we're doing. All of us have a place. We all have a very important place, and we have to respect each other, and we have to trust each other. And when we're in a competitive environment, either in private sector or in the nonprofit sector or in government, because it exists there too between agencies, that competitiveness can really undermine our ability to get to the next big thing, which is moving from the tactical, siloed level of activism that we've been in to a strategic level. A strategic level where we combine forces, combine strategies, think very big about changing the structural frameworks which have allowed us to basically externalize the impacts of the 20th century food system. We need, as was just said, Nicolette said it, we have to shift the investments of the public into the supporting the companies and the thinking that you heard about today. That is the big challenge. So I'm just going to say a couple things about how we're doing that in California. The first thing is we have to link the grassroots communities to the NGOs that work the capitals and the Congress, the city halls, the state capitals. We have to hook those things together. The community groups and the NGOs that know the policy detail, because they have to sing with the same voice. They have to be part of the same chorus, because when they do that, the policymakers will follow, because they need to get reelected. And when they hear the people in the Capitol building saying the things that their constituents are saying, they realize they have to act. And we've been seeing that begin to happen. So the first great example, obviously, is what happened with farm worker wages. Minimum wage for food chain workers all, and then the extension of overtime for farm workers. First time in California history in the United States where farm workers are going to be paid overtime the same way as everybody else. Now that really happened because the Latino communities and the Latino caucus and the Latino legislators were hearing their communities, and they were joined and supported by elements of the food movement. Now, sustainable farmers were afraid of that because it's going to raise their costs. And that's a contradiction that we need to work on together to overcome, because that contradiction hurts the food movement. The contradiction between the cost of food and the availability of food. And that's why we have to change the way we invest public money, because the market alone is not doing it. It's too slow, and there are too many people left out. So, the other thing I want to say, and some of you may have seen this on the back out there. This is a report. The fourth year is being actually written as we speak. This is the California Food Policy Council's report on legislation related to food and farming. And it's actually a collaborative effort between the 27 communities that make up the California Food Policy Council, from Del Norte to San Diego, from the Sierra to the coast, the Central Valley, members, all those areas have members, working with the NGOs to create a list of bills that are tracked, and then they rate, or they critique the legislature in the report and show how the votes were taken, and write an analysis about where the legislators did or did not listen to the food movement. Very powerful tool for convincing legislators that there's an active political force that wants them to be accountable. And we're in our fourth year, and it's, I think, a really important thing. So what have we done building the power? I know I'm out of time, right? Good. Okay. I bet you're ready for me to be done. But let me just say this. In the last 3 years, what's happened? Well, we talked about the fact that food chain workers are better off. Last year, we passed a bill that makes California a partner with USDA in delivering money for nutrition incentives. There's now $5 million available in California to support the farmers markets and CSAs and farm stands that are selling products to WIC and SNAP families. The other really important thing that happened, as was mentioned, led by Community Alliance for Family Farmers and the California Climate and Agriculture Network, we now have this bill that's going to put out $7.5 million to pilot ways to pay farmers to capture carbon and hold water in their soils. So it's working. We're having the impact that we want to have by working together, spending the time listening, even in a moment like we had today. We did listen. I loved how Danny held that moment. She let them speak. She didn't fight them. She let them speak. You all made your feelings known after they had a long time to speak, so we heard them. May not agree, but we heard them, or we may agree. So anyway, we need more of that. We need to spend time. And the other big thing is we can't make the farmers our enemies. They are struggling. They're in a vice. They had a paradigm they were brought up in, and now they're struggling to move. I was in a meeting last week with many leaders from the California agricultural community, including the secretary, and I got to tell you, they are very freaked out. They are scared because we are putting pressure on them, demanding a lot, and the world price for food is not supporting them. So anyway, with that, I say, think big, work together, and believe we can actually transform the whole system. Thank you.